Earlier this year, I was driving through the countryside with a girl of 6, and she pointed out some flowers by the wayside. I asked her what she thought flowers were for. She gave a very thoughtful answer. 2 things, she said, to make the world pretty and to help the bees make honey for us. I thought that this was a very nice answer, and I was very sorry to have to tell her that this wasn't.
Stanford University.
We all get depressed. Bad stuff happens to us. We all get depressed. We feel lousy. We feel withdrawn. We feel sort of a sense of grief, and we're not taking much pleasure, and we withdraw. And then we get better. We cope. We heal. We deal with things in life. What's the deal with you that you can't do that? And there's this lurking sense, given that all of us have periods of being depressed and come out the other end, when you look at people who instead go down and stay down there to this crippling extent, there's always this little voice between the lines there of, come on, pull yourself together. We all deal with this sort of thing. I will make the argument throughout here that depression is as real of a biological disorder as is juvenile diabetes. And you don't sit down a diabetic and say, oh, come on, what's with this insulin stuff? Stop bathing yourself and pull it together. You will see this is just as much of a biological disorder.
Parents and other adults with whom children have close contact have a powerful influence on children's food preferences. Children are very sensitive to the reactions of those around them, and if they see others enjoying a particular food, they will be inclined more favourably towards that food. Thus, if parents want to persuade their children to eat more vegetables, then rather than simply telling them what to eat, it's more effective to demonstrate that they themselves Let's see what's happening on the seabed. Okay, so these really remarkable features are known as black smokers. Don't forget, we're now 2.5 kilometres down. The light, it's all pitch black. What we're seeing is the lights from the submersible. So imagine you're looking at this out from your porthole, and it's a port... Hiroshi Ishiguro, a robot engineer from Osaka University, makes Geminoids, extremely realistic human robots. It's important that they look exactly like real people for Ishiguro to carry out his research. He's interested in understanding philosophical questions such as what is identity, and what might happen if a person and their robot double were able to be in 2 places at the same time. His Geminoid robots have rubber skin and their heads are controlled by motors. These move the head, blink, twitch, shrug the shoulders, and make the robot appear to be breathing during conversations. As well as this, there are motors which are connected to a computer, microphone, and camera. These scan the controller's voice and face movements, then send messages back to the robot, which copies them. The robot's body and skin stop at his chest, though, and he has no robotic legs, so you won't see him.
Not all wild animals can become domestic animals. In fact, only 14 species are fully domestic, according to one scientist. He says that 6 things must be true before it can happen. Without these 6 things, it's impossible for an animal to become domestic. Firstly, the animal must eat inexpensive food that's readily available, so humans can feed it easily. Secondly, the animal must grow fast, because slow-growing animals are unhelpful to humans. It also needs to breed easily. If the animal doesn't have babies, the species will soon disappear. The animal shouldn't be frightened when placed in a small space, because this is dangerous to humans. Finally, it helps if the animal lives in a group in its natural environment. If the group has a social structure, the human can become its leader. If one animal in the group accepts the human as leader, the others will probably
Our oceans are really very well travelled on the surface, but in terms of the deep sea, it's probably the one area of our planet that hasn't been explored. The first visit by a human to the ocean floor was in 1960, when the US Navy sent a vehicle to the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. Anyway, what exactly do we know about the deep sea? Well, we define it as 200 metres below the surface of the ocean, and around that point, sunlight begins to disappear and temperatures begin to drop. 1,000 metres and beyond, there's complete darkness, very little oxygen, and pressures that are 1,000 times greater than at the Earth's surface. However, somehow it's full of life. Life that has a huge effect on our own lives, because half of the oxygen we breathe is generated by living things in the ocean. So in the future, scientists are going to try and find out more about
In the 19th century, there were several periods when large numbers of people moved from one place to another around the world. In many cases, people moved to another continent. These mass migrations were on a much larger scale than any previous migrations in history. One major movement was from Europe to the Americas, Australia, and Africa. This migration of Europeans involved around 60 million people over 100 years. Another mass migration was from Russia to Siberia and Central Asia. Another was from China, India, and Japan to Southeast Asia. These large movements of people were made possible by the new, cheap, and fast means of
In some ways, mental development is related to social development in school-aged children. Between the ages of 6 and 12, children move from being able to think only on a concrete level, that is, about real objects they can touch, to being capable of abstract thought. In their social development, children gradually acquire interpersonal reasoning skills. They learn to understand the feelings of other people, and also learn that a person's actions or words don't always reflect their
Bread and cereals have a long history. The first bread was made in the Nile Valley about 10,000 years ago. The people used stones to crush the grain into coarse flour, and then they made the flour into primitive forms of bread. Primitive bread was not like the bread we know today because it was simply flour dough dried on heated stones. The invention of ovens came later. Leavened breads and cakes, which are made to rise by the action of yeast, were also a discovery of the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians were the first people to master the art of baking. News of this new wonder food spread to other places in the Middle East. Soon other people were collecting seed, cultivating land, and inventing ways to turn grain into flour. Baking used to be a social activity. While some homes had their own ovens, many families had to bake their dough in communal bakeries. To identify their loaves, each household would make a distinctive mark on the bread, sometimes with a special stamp bearing the family.
The body of the worker bee is divided into 3 segments: head, thorax, and abdomen. On the head are the mandibles, the jaw-like organs which enable the bees to perform the necessary hive duties and to mold the wax and build their combs. The honeybee's 4 wings and 6 legs are fastened to the thorax. Located in the abdomen are the honey sac and the sting, with its highly developed poison sac. The sting is used by the workers for self-defense and for the protection of their colony. The worker uses her sting only once, for in doing so, she
Psychology is a relatively new science. Like other sciences, psychology must be able to state laws. A law is a way of organizing knowledge about something so that we can make predictions. When enough knowledge is gained about a subject, a scientist can state precisely what will happen under certain conditions. We experimental psychologists are interested in developing laws about human behavior, so we'll be able to understand and predict what people do and why they do it. Of course, to develop laws about human behavior, we must assume there's some regularity to it. We can't be psychologists without making the assumption that behavior follows.
The complex process inside a leaf takes energy from the sun and uses it to convert water and carbon dioxide into sugars. During this process, photosynthesis, plants convert light energy into chemical energy. All leaves carry out photosynthesis in basically the same way. First, the pores on the leaf's outer skin open up and take in molecules of carbon dioxide. Water absorbed by the roots is transported upward through the plant, and it enters the leaf through its stem. Carbon dioxide and water, these are the raw materials for photosynthesis. Once carbon dioxide and water are present, photosynthesis can
Avalanches are a constant threat on mountain highways. The Rogers Pass stretch of the Trans-Canada is at risk of being buried in snow from November to April every year. This is why the highway now has a sophisticated defense system. The best way, it's important to control an avalanche when it's small, so a slide is set off while it's still small before it builds up into a serious danger. A team of snow technicians monitors the snowpack. They sort of read the snow and try to predict when it's likely to slide. They study data from the weather stations in the mountains. As the danger increases, they drop explosives onto test slopes to see if the snow can be made to slide. Are you going to be more effective and happy as a specialist or as a generalist? Do you find real satisfaction in the precision, order, and system of a clearly laid out job? Or are you one of those people who tend to grow impatient with anything that looks like a routine job? There are a great many careers in which the emphasis is on specialization. You find these careers in engineering and in accounting, in production, in statistical work, and in teaching. But there is an increasing demand for people who are able to take in a great area at a glance. There is, in other words, a demand for people who are capable of seeing the forest rather than the trees, of making overall
The theory of personality types suggests there are pairs of what are known as type preferences. Type preferences are not the same as character traits that can be worked on and changed. Rather, they're preferred ways of being in the world, different ways of experiencing daily life. One well-known pair of type preferences is extraversion-introversion. Some people are extroverts and some are introverts. Extroverted people are by nature continuously aware of events outside of themselves. Extroverts turn outward to the world around them to pick up ideas, values, and interests. Extroverts, therefore, usually have a variety of interests and sort of take an active approach to life. Introversion is just the opposite. Introverts look inward for resources. Introverts pursue fewer interests, but on a much deeper level. They sort of take a reflective approach to life. What I mean is, they involve themselves in inner events, ideas, and impressions. Introverted people usually prefer to learn in private.
The interior of a cave is divided into 3 zones. The entrance zone may serve as a place of shelter for animals or people. Prehistoric humans used entrance zones of caves as shelters and burial grounds. Therefore, such zones are of interest to archaeologists, as they provide clues to the habitat of early human beings. The next zone is called the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone is sheltered from direct sunlight and is home to a large, diverse population of animals, such as salamanders, bats, and during severe winters, bears. The third zone, the Dark Zone, is the true cave environment. Perpetually dark, it has only slight seasonal changes in
Drums can be divided according to shape. Some of the types are tubular, vessel, and frame drums. One of the most common tubular drums is the long drum. A lot of long drums are cylindrical. They have the same diameter from top to bottom, like this Polynesian drum. This drum was carved from a length of tree trunk and has a single skin head. For vessel drums, we have the kettle drum. Kettle drums have a single membrane stretched over a pot or vessel body. Vessel drums come in a variety of sizes, from the very large drums of Africa to the very compact and portable drums, like this one from Hawaii. The third type I want you to see is the frame drum. A frame drum consists of one or two membranes stretched over a simple frame, which is usually made of thin.
Land animals move easily through air because air does not slow them down. Sea creatures, on the other hand, have to move through water, which is hundreds of times thicker than air. A sea animal has to push itself through water in order to move. Sea animals use many different ways to swim, creep, or glide through water. Fish are able to swim by bending their bodies into waves. They have flattened fins and tails that push against the water like oar blades, converting their body waves into forward movement. The size of a fish's tail contributes to its swimming speed. Small tail fins are found in slow swimmers like the eel. The medium-sized tail of the bass is linked with a medium to fast swimming speed. Long pointed tail lobes like those on the marlin are found only on fast.
Early jazz musicians were active in many cities and towns throughout the southern United States. It was New Orleans, with its long tradition of African-American music, that was the home of many fathers of jazz. After World War I, the musicians of New Orleans joined the general northward migration of African Americans. The first great national center of jazz was Chicago. From there, the music entered the mainstream and even gave its name to the decade of the 1920s. Jazz, blending African-American folk roots with elements of popular music and European classical traditions, has been called America.
The word science comes from a Latin verb meaning to know. Science is a way of knowing. It emerges from our curiosity about ourselves and our world. Striving to understand is one of our basic drives. Who are scientists? Scientists are people who ask questions about nature and who believe that these questions can be answered. Scientists are explorers who are passionate about Biology is considered one of the natural sciences. It is the science of life and life's processes. And like life, science is better understood by observing it than by trying to create a precise definition. Over the next 15 weeks, we will be observing the science of biology. In many ways, biology is the most demanding of all sciences. This is partly because living systems are so complex. Biology is also a multidisciplinary science. It requires knowledge of chemistry, physics, and mathematics. And of all the sciences, biology is the most linked to the social sciences and
Management requires a great deal of energy and effort, more than most people care to make. One factor that affects managers and inhibits their capacity to provide leadership is stress. Stress has lots of causes: work overload, criticism from workers, and can have negative health effects, including loss of sleep. It's a fact. Managers have to deal with stress. Some handle it by making time to be by themselves. Most have some favorite place or pastime, a beach to walk on, maybe a stream to fish in, or a game to play with the kids. It's important to have some form of rest and relaxation. Creating art, working with your hands, gardening, playing sports, the list goes on. Rest doesn't always mean inactivity. For some people, exercise is
The computerized workplace can be hazardous to your health if you don't take preventative measures. Today, we'll go over what some of these hazards are, and more importantly, what can be done about them. One major complaint, maybe the biggest complaint, of people who spend time at the computer is eye strain. To help ease the strain on the eyes, the computer screen should be about 2 feet from your eyes. The entire screen should be in focus. The brightness and contrast should be adjusted for best readability. A good way to relieve eye strain is to look away from the screen frequently. Focus your eyes on objects that are far away, like something outside, the building across the street or the tree in the park. There have been several influential studies in pain management. Some of the most interesting of these study endorphins, the body's own natural painkillers. For example, we now know that exercise stimulates the production of endorphins. Lack of exercise, on the other hand, not only shuts down endorphin production, but can also lead to muscle deterioration. This is why you see a lot of pain specialists prescribing exercise for patients with chronic pain. Another interesting area involves the power of the placebo effect. We've known for some time that a sugar pill, or other inactive placebo, can sometimes make a sick person feel better. Somehow, the power of suggestion, or faith in the doctor, or the drug, will start a process of healing. We now think a neurochemical component. What may actually happen is the placebo effect allows some people to sort of tap into the supply of endorphins.
Each kind of insurance protects its policyholder against possible financial loss. Life insurance pays your family a certain sum upon your death. The purpose of life insurance is to provide your family with financial security, an immediate estate that will allow them to maintain the household after you die. Health insurance protects you against large medical expenses. When you pay premiums to your insurance company, you can ensure payment of your medical bills. Another kind, property liability insurance, is sometimes called casualty insurance because it covers the cost of accidents, like automobile accidents, fire, and theft. If you're like most people, your home is the largest single investment you make in your life. This is why most homeowners have some type of property liability insurance.
Our knowledge of the oceans 100 years ago was confined to the two-dimensional shape of the sea surface and the hazards of navigation presented by the irregularities in depth of the shallow water close to the land. The open sea was deep and mysterious, and anyone who gave more than a passing thought to the bottom confines of the oceans probably assumed that the seabed was flat. Sir James Clark Ross had obtained a sounding of over 2,400 fathoms in 1839, but it was not until 1869, when HMS Porcupine was put at the disposal of the Royal Society for several cruises, that a series of deep soundings was obtained in the Atlantic, and the first samples were collected by dredging the bottom. Shortly after this, the famous HMS Challenger expedition established the study of the seafloor as a subject worthy of the most qualified physicists and geologists. A burst of activity associated with the laying of submarine cables soon confirmed the Challenger's observation that many parts of the ocean were 2 to 3 miles deep, and the existence of underwater features of considerable In the early days of the settlement of Australia, enterprising settlers unwisely introduced the European rabbit. This rabbit had no natural enemies in the Antipodes, so that it multiplied with that promiscuous, abandon characteristic of rabbits. It overran a whole continent. It caused devastation by burrowing and by devouring the herbage which might have maintained millions of sheep and cattle. Scientists discovered that this particular variety of rabbit, and apparently no other animal, was susceptible to a fatal virus disease, myxomatosis. By infecting animals and letting them loose in the burrows, local epidemics of this disease could be created. Later it was found that there was a type of mosquito which acted as the carrier of this disease, and passed it on to the rabbits. So while the rest of the world was trying to get rid of mosquitoes, Australia was encouraging this one. It effectively spread the disease all over the continent and drastically reduced the rabbit population. It later became apparent that rabbits were developing a degree of resistance to this disease, so that the rabbit population was unlikely to be completely exterminated. There were hopes, however, that the problem of the rabbit would become the adolescent, with his passion for sincerity, always respects a parent who admits that he is wrong or ignorant, or even that he has been unfair or unjust. What the child cannot forgive is the parent's refusal to admit these charges if the child knows them to be true. Victorian parents believed that they kept their dignity by retreating behind an unreasoning authoritarian attitude. In fact, they did nothing of the kind, but children were then too cowed to let them know how they really felt. Today, we tend to go to the other extreme. But on the whole, this is a healthier attitude both for the child and the parent. It is always wiser and safer to face up. People are always talking about the problem of youth. If there is one, which I take leave to doubt, then it is older people who create it, not the young themselves. Let us get down to fundamentals and agree that the young are, after all, human beings, people just like their elders. There is only one difference between an old man and a young one. The young man has a glorious future before him, and the old one has a splendid future behind him. And maybe that is where the rub is. When I was a teenager, I felt that I was just young and uncertain, that I was a new boy in a huge school, and I would have been very pleased to be regarded as something so interesting as a problem. For one thing, being a problem gives you a certain identity. And that is one of the things the young are busily engaged in.
Atmospheric pressure can support a column of water up to 10 meters high, but plants can move water much higher. The sequoia tree can pump water to its very top more than 100 meters above the ground. Until the end of the 19th century, the movement of water in trees and other tall plants was a mystery. Some botanists hypothesized that the living cells of plants acted as palms. But many experiments demonstrated that the stems of plants in which all the cells are cooled can still move water to appreciable heights. Other explanations for the movement of water in plants have been based on root pressure, a push on the water from the roots at the bottom of the plant. But root pressure is not nearly great enough to push water to the tops of tall trees. Furthermore, the conifers, which are among the tallest trees, have unusually low
Inferential statistics is a formalized body of methods for solving another class of problems that present great difficulties for the unaided human mind. This general class of problems characteristically involve attempts to make predictions using a sample of observations. For example, a school superintendent wishes to determine the proportion of children in a large school system who come to school without breakfast, have been vaccinated for flu, or whatever. Having little knowledge of statistics, the superintendent would know that it is unnecessary and inefficient to question each child. The proportion for the entire district could be estimated fairly accurately from a sample of as few as 100 children. Thus, the purpose of inferential statistics is to predict or estimate characteristics of a population from a knowledge of the characteristics of only a sample.